You're a child, maybe 9 years old 100,000 years ago. This morning, your grandmother didn't wake up. The adults are quiet in a way you've never seen. They move slowly. Nobody is telling you what to do. And then they carry her out, and they do something with her body. Careful, deliberate, sad. They lay her down gently. They fold her arms. They place things beside her. And for the first time in your short life, a question lands in your small skull that will never fully leave. Where did she go? And underneath it, quieter and colder. A second question you don't have the words for yet. Will that happen to me? That question, that exact question, in some prehistoric child's mind, might be the single most important thing that ever happened to our species. More important than fire. More important than tools. More important than language, maybe because in a strange way it is the thing that gave language something worth saying. Because the day humans started asking where the dead go is the day we started becoming who we are. So that is what this video is. Not a list of old bones, a search for a moment, the moment the lights came on, the moment a creature on this planet looked at death and for the first time understood that it was coming for them too. And I'll be honest with you up front, the answer is older, weirder, and far more moving than I expected when I started digging. So stick with me. Let's start with the lie. The lie is that ancient humans were too primitive to really grasp death, that they were basically clever animals, reacting, surviving, eating, mating, dying, with no more awareness of their own mortality than a deer has, that the big existential weight of knowing you'll die, the 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling dread, is a modern luxury. Something that came along with civilization and too much free time and philosophy and wine. It is a comforting story in a way. It lets us imagine our ancestors as untroubled, simple, at peace, because they didn't know enough to be afraid, and it is completely, provably wrong. Because the evidence that ancient humans understood death, not as a fact about other people, but as a fact about themselves, is written into the ground in a way that is almost impossible to misread. Let's talk about burial. Here is something most people never stop to think about. Animals don't bury their dead. Not really. An elephant might touch the bones of a dead relative, might linger, might come back. And that is genuinely moving, and we'll get to it. But an elephant does not dig a grave. A wolf does not arrange its dead packmate's body. A chimpanzee, our closest living relative, who shares almost all of our DNA, does not hold a funeral. Burial is a human thing, and it is ancient. The oldest deliberate human burials we've found go back at least 1,000 years to sites like Qafzeh and Skhul in what is now Israel. And these weren't just bodies dumped in a hole to keep predators away. That is the explanation skeptics always reach for first. Maybe they were just disposing of corpses for hygiene for safety, no deeper meaning required. But the bodies tell a different story at Qafzeh. A young person was buried with the antlers of a red deer placed across the chest, held in the arms. At other sites, bodies were laid out in deliberate positions, curled as if sleeping, heads oriented in particular directions, sprinkled with red ochre, a pigment that had to be sourced, ground, and applied on purpose. You do not decorate garbage. And let's stay on that red ochre for a second, because it matters more than it sounds. Ochre is a natural earth pigment, an iron-rich rock that produces a deep blood red when ground into powder. It does not occur conveniently inside every cave. It has to be found. Sometimes mined, carried, ground down, and mixed. That is a chain of deliberate effort performed for no practical survival reason whatsoever. You can't eat ochre. It doesn't sharpen a spear. It doesn't keep you warm. People used it anyway on their dead for tens of thousands of years across multiple continents. And red is not a random choice. Red is the color of blood, of life, of the inside of the body. To sprinkle a corpse with red powder is to do something symbolic, to say something about life and death that you cannot say with a tool. That is not survival behavior. That is the behavior of a mind that has started asking what death is and reaching for a way to answer. The moment you place a deer antler in the arms of a dead child, you have stopped treating that body as a problem to remove and started treating it as a person to honor. And honoring the dead only makes sense if you understand, at some level, that this is a person who was here and now is gone, that there is a difference between a living body and a dead one, that the difference is permanent. And this is the part that matters, that the same difference is one day coming for you. Now, let's go further back. Let's talk about the Neanderthals. For about a century, the Neanderthals were the poster children for the brutish caveman click-she stupid, hunched grunting. An evolutionary dead end that we, the clever ones, outcompeted and replaced. Almost everything in that picture is now known to be wrong. Neanderthals had brains as large as ours, sometimes larger. They made tools, controlled fire, used medicinal plants, created pigments, possibly made art, and they buried their dead. The most famous case is a cave called Shanidar, in the mountains of northern Iraq. Inside, archaeologists found the remains of multiple Neanderthal individuals. One of them, and I find this almost unbearably human, appears to have been laid to rest in a spot where, decades later, researchers found dense clusters of ancient pollen. For years, there was a beautiful theory that this was the flower burial, that mourners had laid flowers on the body. Some scientists now argue the pollen may have been brought in by burrowing bees or rodents, and the debate is genuinely unresolved, so I'm not going to oversell it. But here is what isn't in dispute. The body was deliberately placed in a cave by other Neanderthals who chose, for reasons that had nothing to do with survival, to do something careful and intentional with their dead. And remember the other Shanidar individual, the one anthropologists call Shanidar 1, the man with the withered arm, partially blind, with serious old injuries that had healed, which means his group fed him and protected him for years when he could not have contributed much in return. They kept him alive, and when he died, they didn't discard him. They placed him in the earth. These were not creatures stumbling blindly through existence. These were beings who took care of each other in life and marked the loss of each other in death. They knew. Now, I want to tell you about the discovery that genuinely broke people's brains, including mine. In 2013, in a cave system called Rising Star, deep in South Africa, recreational cavers found bones in a chamber so remote and so difficult to reach that it sounds made up. To get there, you climb, you crawl, and at one point you squeeze through a vertical gap about 7.5 inches wide in total darkness underground. In that chamber, researchers eventually recovered the remains of at least 15 individuals of a previously unknown human relative, which they named Homo naledi. And here is where it gets strange. Homo naledi had a brain about a third the size of a modern human's, roughly the size of an orange by every assumption we used to hold. A creature with a brain that small should not be capable of complex, symbolic, future-oriented thought. And yet, the leading interpretation, and I'll be fair, it is fiercely debated, is that these bodies were deliberately placed in that chamber, carried one by one through the dark through that impossible crawl space by other members of their group. There is no evidence they lived in that chamber. No evidence a flood washed them in. The most likely explanation the researchers can find is the most astonishing one. They were brought there on purpose. Their dead were carried into the heart of the earth and left in a place chosen for that purpose alone. If that is true, and the team has even reported what might be engravings on the cave walls nearby, though that is still being scrutinized, then a creature with a brain the size of an orange was doing something with death that we associate with poetry and religion, hundreds of thousands of years ago. Which forces a deeply uncomfortable, deeply wonderful question. If even Homo naledi understood death, then awareness of mortality isn't some recent achievement of big-brained, civilized, sophisticated us. It might be one of the oldest things about being even a little bit human. Now, here is where we have to be careful, because this is where it gets philosophically slippery, and I don't want to lie to you. There is a difference between two things that sound the same. Un is reacting to a dead body, recognizing that something is wrong, that a companion isn't moving, feeling distress. Lots of animals do this, and they do it in ways that will absolutely wreck you if you read about them for too long. Elephants are the classic example. When an elephant encounters the bones of a dead relative, it doesn't just walk past, it stops. It reaches out with its trunk and touches the bones, especially the skull and the tusks, turning them over, exploring them, sometimes carrying them for a while before setting them down. Elephants have been observed returning to the place where a family member died. Again and again. For years, researchers who study them describe behavior that looks, to any honest observer, like mourning. And it is not just elephants. We've watched chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, sit with the body of a dead troop member for hours, grooming it, swatting flies away from it, refusing to leave. There is a famous and devastating set of observations of chimpanzee mothers who carried their dead infants for days, sometimes weeks, long after the body had begun to decompose, simply unable to put it down. Orcas have done the same with dead calves, pushing the body through the water for hundreds of miles. And crows will gather around one of their dead in large, loud, agitated groups, in what scientists actually call a crow funeral. Though the birds may be doing it partly to learn about danger. That is grief, or something close to it. And it is real, and it is humbling, and it is not unique to us. But there is a second thing, and it is the thing this whole video is circling. It is not just understanding that they died, it is understanding that I will die. It is taking the death sitting in front of you and turning it around to point at yourself, generalizing it, projecting it forward in time, looking at a body in a grave and thinking, with a cold drop in the stomach, one day that is me. That is mortality salience, the awareness of your own death. And as far as we can tell, it is the rarest and strangest cognitive trick on Earth. Because here is the thing about that thought. It requires a brain that can do something almost no other animal can. It requires mental time travel, the ability to step out of right now and imagine a future that you yourself will not be present for. To picture a world that contains everyone you love and does not contain you. Sit with how bizarre that actually is. Most animals live almost entirely in the present. A gazelle that escapes a lion goes back to grazing minutes later, the terror already gone, because it isn't running a simulation of next Tuesday's lion. It can't, but a human can lie awake tonight, perfectly safe, well-fed in no danger at all, and feel real dread about something that hasn't happened and won't happen for decades. We are the animal that can be afraid of the future. And the ultimate future, the one waiting at the end of every single timeline you could ever imagine for yourself, is the one where you're gone. To know you will die, you have to be able to run that simulation all the way to the end. You have to take the dead body in front of you, recognize it as the same kind of thing you are, and then fast forward your own life until it arrives at the same stillness. That is a staggering chain of abstract reasoning, and the evidence in the ground suggests our ancestors were running it 100,000 years ago, maybe far longer. That is an extraordinary thing for 3 pounds of electrified meat to be able to do. And the moment a creature could do it, the moment that thought became possible, everything we think of as human came pouring out of the gap it opened. Let me explain what I mean, because this is the heart of it. This is the part nobody tells you. We tend to think of death awareness as a wound, a burden, the tragic downside of being smart. And on the bad nights, sure, it feels that way. But flip it around, why do humans make art? Why do we carve things, paint things, build things meant to outlast us? Why do we tell stories and pass them down? Why do we have children and teach them the names of our own grandparents? Why do we build monuments, write our names on things, leave a mark? Because we know we end, and knowing we end is exactly what makes us reach for something that doesn't. An animal that doesn't know it will die has no reason to leave anything behind. No reason to wonder where the dead go. No reason to invent gods, or heavens, or ancestors who watch over the living. No reason to ask what any of it means. Those questions, the biggest, oldest, most human questions there are, only exist because somewhere, long ago, a mind looked at a grave and understood it was looking at its own future. Death awareness isn't the thing that ruins the human story, it is the thing that starts it. There is actually a whole branch of psychology built around this idea, and it is worth a detour because it is genuinely unsettling. In the 1980 seconds, a group of researchers, Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pazinski, developed something called terror management theory. The core claim is blunt. Human beings are the only animals that walk around knowing every single day that we are going to die. And that knowledge is so potentially paralyzing that our entire culture, our religions, our nations, our art or obsession with fame and legacy and being remembered exists in large part as a buffer against the terror of it. In their view, when you build something meant to last, when you attach yourself to something bigger than your own short life, you are managing the unbearable fact of your mortality. You are borrowing a little piece of permanence. And while researchers argue about the details, the experimental evidence is striking. When you subtly remind people that they will die, their behavior changes. They cling harder to their beliefs, their groups, their sense of meaning. In other words, the awareness of death isn't just a sad fact we carry, it is an engine. It quietly drives an enormous amount of what we do. And if terror management theory is even partly right, then that engine has been running since the very first human stood over a grave and felt the cold drop of recognition. And the deepest place that engine has ever run is the one we started with. Think about that grandmother again, the one from the beginning. When her people laid her in the ground and placed something beside her, an antler, a flower, a handful of red ochre, they weren't just disposing of a body. They were making a statement. They were saying, this person mattered, and the fact that she is gone matters, and we are going to mark it because we understand what has happened here, and we understand it could be us. That single gesture, placing one object beside one body, is the seed of everything. Religion grows out of it. Philosophy grows out of it, art, ritual, history, the entire human obsession with meaning and legacy, and the question of what happens after, all of it traces back to a prehistoric mourner who understood death well enough to refuse to let it be the end of the story. And here is what gets me. We are still doing it right now, you and me, when you visit a grave, when you keep a photo of someone who is gone. When you tell your kids about a great-grandparent they never met, when you feel that strange pull to leave something behind, to be remembered, to matter past the length of your own life. That is not a modern neurosis. That is the oldest human instinct there is, firing in you exactly the way it fired in a 9-year-old standing over a grandmother's grave 100,000 years ago. You are not the first to feel the weight of this. You are the latest in an unbroken line of people stretching back further than we can see, who looked at death and decided to make something out of it, who refused to look away. There is a strange comfort in that. I think we spend so much time treating our fear of death as a private, modern, slightly shameful thing, a glitch, something to medicate or distract ourselves out of. But it isn't a glitch. It is an inheritance. It is the same cold question that landed in that child's skull all those years ago, passed down through 10,000 generations, finally landing in you. You know you're going to die, so did they. And the entire towering, beautiful, ridiculous human project, the art and the love and the names carved in stone and the stories told around the fire, exist because of that knowledge, not in spite of it. So did ancient humans know they would die? Yes. Probably long before they were even fully us, long before the word for it, long before religion gave it shape or philosophy gave it argument. Some ancestor of ours, with a brain we'd barely recognize, looked at the stillness of a body that had been moving the day before and understood, in a wordless, stomach-dropping way, that the same stillness was waiting for them. And instead of being destroyed by that, they did the most human thing imaginable. They picked up a flower and they laid it down. So here's my question for you, and I really do want to know if you could unknow it, if you could give up your awareness of your own death and live like an animal fully and only in the present, with no dread and no weight, but also no monuments, no legacy, no wondering where anyone goes. Would you? Would you trade the knowledge for the peace? Let me know in the comments. Until then, take care of yourselves and of each other. And I'll see you soon.